Greetings, I'm Salvador Cordova. Welcome to Investigate MBC. Today I'll be reading a letter that pertains to David Platt. It's a letter that I'm going to circulate to various outlets. David Platt was invited to speak at Liberty University at the end of September at a convocation event, an event that's usually reserved for dignitaries, distinguished people in society. Liberty University has an enrollment of about 50,000 undergrads, and the undergrads are required to attend convocation events. So this is going to be a big deal. David Platt, prior to becoming pastor of McLean Bible Church, was head of the International Mission Board, IMB, of the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, and the International Mission Board had an annual operating budget of somewhere around $260 million. So David Platt, being the former head of this, I guess in the eyes of Liberty University, would be considered a distinguished individual. However, after David Platt left the IMB and became pastor of McLean Bible Church, there were a lot of problems at that church, definitely evidenced by the the disastrous decline in attendance, maybe possibly 75% attendance drop in only a few years since his arrival. There is an outstanding lawsuit under appeal against David Platt's leadership. There could be multiple lawsuits by the end of the year also. And there is in the New Testament, if you can't run your own household well in a way worthy of respect, one should not be an elder. By way of extension, I would think if one can't run his own church well in a manner worthy of respect, he shouldn't be telling other people how to run their churches and mission organizations. Given David Platt's performance at McLean Bible Church, it certainly raises questions whether he should have even been appointed to the International Mission Board to begin with. So I'm going to read a letter that I'm going to circulate to a variety of outlets, including the decision makers at Liberty University. And I'm going to raise the question, should David Platt speak at Liberty University Convocation? So I'm just going to read from my makeshift teleprompter here, the letter that I'm going to send, and then afterward also read from a affidavit that I signed that is referenced in the letter. So here goes. Should David Platt speak at the Liberty University Convocation? In July 2022, I was a speaker at Liberty University for the annual Creation Research Society CRS conference, which was convened by one of the provosts of Liberty University. In the audience at my presentation were faculty from the Department of Biology and Chemistry, faculty from the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and the Dean of the School of Engineering. I'm a molecular biophysics researcher who has defended the Christian faith for 20 years. I wish to thank Liberty for hosting the CRS conference and giving me a chance to share my scientific research, which affirms that the Christian God is the creator and that God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, are clearly seen in the things that are made, Romans 1:20. In contrast to Liberty's hospitality toward me, I'm now under threat of arrest and jail if I ever return to a Christian congregation which I've been a part of since 1983, namely McLean Bible Church, MBC, a church which David Platt has now pastored since 2017. David Platt has not told me specifically why I'm under threat of arrest and jail, but his hostility toward me probably began last year when I made a YouTube video that publicly rebuked his associate pastor, Mike Kelsey, for Kelsey's friendliness to the Black Lives Matter movement, BLM. I publicly rebuked Mike Kelsey for saying in an interview, quote, "It's difficult for me not to torch all white people, especially white evangelicals and Christians," end quote. I objected to David Platt's associate pastor publicly flaunting Black Lives Matter to God signs at public events during the time when BLM protesters were literally torching communities to the ground. I rebuked Mike Kelsey because in his sermons, Sunday schools, writings, and speaking events, he has marginalized Christians just for being white. I rebuked him in obedience to 1 Timothy 5:20, which says, "For those who persist in sin, rebuke them in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear." I also photographed BLM activists openly promoting BLM in the NBC lobby on Sunday mornings. Here is one such photo showing NBC Pastor Wade Burnett with a BLM activist. David Platt and his leadership team have also been caught on video threatening members of the congregation with arrest and jail if they spoke out at congregational meetings. And this includes members demanding points of order and introducing motions from the floor under Robert's rules, which are their customary rights as voting members of the congregation. Their due process right to speak at church business meetings should be protected rather than prevented by threats of jail. Because of the suppression of the free flow of information at congregational meetings, I reached out to the congregation through the internet. But David Platt, from the pulpit, referred to such online outreaches as ungodly and that my activities were, quote, online attacks in videos and blogs and all sorts of other worldly avenues, end quote. Independent of what I say, the most telling indictment of David Platt's leadership is that only in a few years, close to 10,000 people have stopped attending services in person at his church and have instead flocked to nearby conservative churches, causing those churches to set attendance records. To highlight the decline to fellow church members and the public, I posted an animated graph on YouTube on September 30th, 2021. The animated graph I posted is akin to this one, where the red dashed lines are in-person numbers and the solid lines are from official congregational reports, which unfortunately conflate online and in-person attendance numbers. This graph is evidence that a forensic audit of NBC finances is warranted, given that official congregational reports indicate practically same year-over-year revenues, despite a possible 75% loss in brick and mortar attendance. 4 days after I posted that graph on YouTube, on October 3rd, 2021, in the middle of a worship service, NBC security escorted me out of the sanctuary in full view of the congregation, brought me to the sheriff, and threatened me with arrest and jail if I ever returned. In response, I made another YouTube video advocating for a forensic audit of NBC's finances in light of the obvious drop in attendance that was incongruent with reported revenues that were virtually the same year over year, despite the attendance drop. A week and a half later, David Platt sent an email message to the congregation accusing me of, quote, inappropriate and disturbing behavior, end quote, and for, quote unquote, targeting the church. And I was, for, quote, security reasons, not permitted to attend NBC locations, end quote. In my opinion, this sort of language insinuated I was some sort of terrorist. I was never given a chance to speak in my defense to the congregation about these false insinuations. I believe I should be given the privilege to speak before the congregation according to Proverbs 18:17, where it says, "The first to state his case seems right, until the other comes and cross-examines him." I have signed that contests David Platt's insinuations that I'm some sort of terrorist trying to disrupt worship services. Conversely, to my knowledge, David Platt has not signed a sworn affidavit affirming that the communications he circulated about me are true. His claims about me should be cross-examined according to Proverbs 18:17, and I invite him to swear before God and the courts that I was worthy of being threatened with arrest and jail for speaking the truth. Then, 8 weeks later after these events, on November 29, 2021, NBC also threatened a young Christian wife and mother with arrest and jail, and dragged her into court in order to get an actual conviction. Thankfully, the judge protected her from NBC's hostile actions and dismissed the charges NBC leveled against her. Her offense appears to be that she demanded answers to questions at an informational meeting, and that she was married to and cooperating with someone who was sharply critical of David Platt's conduct. I've so far been denied the opportunity to subject David Platt and the Elder Board to a Matthew 18 process before the congregation for their outrageous actions against their own flock. Instead, they have tried to subject me to a Matthew 18 process for advocating viewpoints such as represented in this letter. David Platt was head of the International Mission Board, IMB, of the Southern Baptist Convention, SBC. To give an idea of the size of the organization he oversaw, the IMB was an organization with a $260 million annual budget, funded mostly by donations. But when it comes to David Platt running a church, the numbers speak for themselves. If an elder can't manage his own house in a manner worthy of respect, he should not be an elder, 1 Timothy 3:4. And by way of extension, if a pastor can't manage his own church in a manner worthy of respect, what business does he have telling churches and missionaries how to change the world? We would hope David Platt does not do for Christendom what he has done for his own church. I understand David Platt will be speaking in late September at the Liberty University Convocation, but surely Liberty can confront David and ask him if he thinks he can serve as a role model for pastors and missionaries. Is he a pastor who actually runs his own church well and in a manner worthy of respect, versus a pastor who, in only a few years, torched into near oblivion a once thriving church built over several decades by dedicated Christians? Signed, in his and your service, Salvador Cordova. And now, I'll read from the affidavit that I mentioned earlier. Affidavit. I, Salvador Cordova, make oath and say that my first visit to McLean Bible Church, MBC, was in 1983. I have not intended to disrupt religious services at any of the campuses of McLean Bible Church since formally becoming a member of the church in 2019. And neither was it my intent to incite anyone to disrupt religious services. I became a member in 2018 so I could teach apologetics at MBC. I never made an admission privately or publicly that I intended to disrupt religious services at any of the campuses of McLean Bible Church. Prior to being served a notice of trespass by McLean Bible Church on October 3rd, 2021, I was not confronted personally by anyone in leadership that specifically said my conduct at the campuses of McLean Bible Church was so, quote, inappropriate and disturbing, unquote, that I would be at risk of disfellowship, excommunication, or trespass. As a conscientious member in good standing at McLean Bible Church, my primary mission on October 3rd, 2021 was to worship God in his sanctuary and to perform as unobtrusively as possible an independent audit of attendance numbers that day at the Loudoun campus. That was my primary mission that day, as it was in the prior weeks at the Tysons campus and at the Prince William campus. I was performing this independent audit with the hope of communicating my results to the congregation and public, either congregational meetings and or by other means such as YouTube or emails. I was curious to confirm that the brick and mortar attendance at McLean Bible Church was as severe as I suspected, so that I could compare the attendance numbers to reported revenues and determine if a discrepancy existed between attendance counts and reported revenues, and if a forensic audit of MBC's finances was warranted. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, this is signed in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Prince William County, subscribed and sworn before a notary. So that's it. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to read my letter and this affidavit. And take care, and God bless you. and may the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you.